Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 229 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we're going to jump right in with a special announcement.
Yes, we are. We're not going to make you wait till the end of the episode, as we sometimes do. We are announcing the second quarter read-along in our year of reading ghost stories.
Yes. Our first one was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And up next is another haunted house story, The Good House by Tananarive Due.
This was originally published in 2003. It's readily available on all platforms. We were sure to check for those of you who are audiobook listeners. They say it's a supernatural suspense, which sounds scary and fun.
Yes. Yeah, and it's set in Sacagawea, Washington. So just from the blurb that's in Goodreads, it's about a woman who goes to her grandmother's home that had always been this magical place for her to help save her marriage, and something bad happens. And then 2 years later, she goes to revisit, and then we will find out from there what goes on. But apparently something happened in 1929 with her grandmother, and this is set in contemporary days. So I can't wait to dive in.
Yes, and we've set the Zoom conversation for June 8th, Sunday, June 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Send us an email at bookcougars@gmail.com if you'd like to join us. The book is close to 600 pages, which is why we're giving you a little extra time. There'll be an online conversation on Goodreads. We keep the conversations up there, so if you're still planning to read The Haunting of Hill House or already have, there is an online conversation on our Goodreads page that you can join. And we have all those links in the show notes and also on a Ghost Stories tab that we created on the website. And that link is in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and if her name is ringing a bell, it could be because her most recent book, The Reformatory, landed on a lot of best of lists last year.
Yeah.
I know she's a very hot horror writer, and I look forward to experiencing one of her books.
Chris, what are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading a million books, is what it feels like. I had surgery a couple weeks ago. Everything's good. I'm fantastic. But the anesthesia really messed with my ability to focus and concentrate. So here I thought I would have kind of like 2 weeks to do a lot of reading. And I've just recently been able to pick up a book and concentrate again. So we're reading Swan's Way, which is the first book in Proust's 7 or 8 volumes of In Search of Lost Time, which is considered the longest book ever written. And since I was having this struggle reading, I thought, well, let me try an audio version. There are several audio versions out there, and I chose the one by Simon Vance because we've had him on as a guest before. I really enjoy his voice, and it added a layer to the story for me because his voice, to me, reading Swan's Way, it made the narrator sound like an upper class English vampire. Because, Vance narrated Dracula. And so that's just stuck in my head. So that added a nice level of humor that actually, when I picked up the book again, because, to be honest, I was having a little bit of a struggle sticking with it when my mind was still fresh and not anesthetized. And listening to the audio and then going back to the book from where I had stopped reading the physical copy, something clicked for me. So I really appreciate that. We had our first discussion about the first half of the book this last weekend, and it was really great. And I look forward to catching up with everyone because I am behind in the reading of that. But I can see now why it has such a stellar reputation as being this literary masterpiece, because the writing is beautiful. The way he writes a sentence, you start one place and then all of a sudden you end up in this other place. And sometimes when I've gone back to reread a sentence or a paragraph, I think, oh, I didn't get something. Sometimes it's true. I'll pick up something else that I didn't realize. And other times it's like, no, that's what you read. And it may not really resonate or have much meaning. But then the next sentence just transports me to my own childhood, which is fascinating because it's so detailed. And it can be rather cumbersome at times. It's probably not the right word. Tedious might be another word for some of the detail, but I am really appreciating it. Appreciation is a good word at this point. So that's Swan's Way by Marcel Proust.
I love the idea of the audiobook helping you along your way. I've been experiencing that more and more these days. Sometimes it's the opposite. I start the audiobook and I'm like, oh, I've got to get my hands on the paper. And other times I'm having trouble with the paper and get my hands on the audiobook, and something just makes it work by the auditory aspect. Hats off to you for sticking with it, even with a loopy brain.
Yes.
Well, I'm reading Tilda is Visible by Jane Tara. This is a novel that just pubbed this week on February 25th. This is a really fun novel. Jane Tara is from Australia, and I guess she's published tons of children's books and is well known, but this is her first adult novel. The concept of it is the protagonist, Tilda, is in her 50s. She's gone through a divorce. She's very successful, creative business person. She has twin daughters that are 20, and she wakes up one day and parts of her are starting to become invisible, like her pinky finger and her ear and her nose. And she goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, yeah, you've got invisibility. It's a disease that women typically get when they are in their 50s, which, is a play on the whole idea that we middle-aged women joke about, that, once you have gray hair and reach a certain age, nobody notices you anymore. But this novel takes a slight twist where is she noticing herself? Is she respecting herself? How did she get to this point where she's literally becoming invisible? It's really good. It's laugh out loud funny in certain parts. I love the cast of characters that are along the ride for her, including her mother, her daughters, her best friends, and business partners. Highly recommend it. Tilda is Visible by Jane Tara. If you see it in the store, it has a very cute, compelling cover.
Nice. Well, I tell you, sometimes I look down at my hands or something, and it's kind of like, whose hand is that?
Amen.
It doesn't look like my hand anymore. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Anyway.
Yes. Or like the gentleman caller says, I walked by the mirror the other day and I saw my grandfather. Mm-hmm. Yes, we all are learning as we go here.
I appreciate being old to see these changes happening.
Yes.
So the other book I'm reading is an old friend, The Song of the Lark by Willa Cather. And I'm buddy reading this with Colleen and the group of readers she put together to do a year of reading all 12 of Willa Cather's novels. This one used to be my favorite for the longest time. It's about a young girl growing up in Colorado. But like all of Cather's books, it's really Red Cloud, Nebraska. But it's, late 1800s. And it's a story of the community around her and how she's supported. She eventually becomes a very famous opera singer. It's her journey. And there are some beautiful scenes in this one, as in, I guess, all of Cather's novels. Who am I kidding, right? It's a little clunky, though, too. It's interesting because the last novel we read was O Pioneers, which I think was a lot smoother in some ways than The Song of the Lark. We're going to be discussing the book on March 8th, but this year of reading Cather, anyone is welcome to jump in at any time. Could jump in for one book or whatever's remaining. So if you are interested, let us know, or we'll put a link to Colleen's Instagram in the show notes, and you can connect with her directly about this really fun reading challenge.
Yeah, it's fun to visit an old friend. You're very good about doing that.
Well, you know what? And I picked it up when I finally felt well enough to try reading, and it did help a little bit to be rereading something, because I didn't have to pay attention quite as much because I knew what was happening. So that was a good thing too.
Yeah.
To reread when you're having trouble concentrating.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Well, I'm reading a book called The Wrong Way to Save Your Life by Megan Stielstra. And this is a book of essays. I'm going to show Chris the cover. It's this really compelling cover of a human heart.
Cool.
The book came out in 2017, which was during the first Trump administration. And when I started it, I was like, oh, this is so interesting, because the introduction was about that and about finding our place in where we were. She definitely did talk a little bit about politics. And I've made my way through the first couple of essays. I found this book in a very convoluted way that was recommended by another author who I was reading. It was one of those things where she was answering a set of questions, and one of the questions was about books that you love. And she mentioned this, and the title, The Wrong Way to Save Your Life, was so compelling to me. I thought, I got to check this out. And I quickly ran over to the library and got a copy. So I'm not very far in, but the first essay took place in Chicago. So it reminded me of you, Chris. And it was back when she was much younger and trying to explore the idea of becoming a writer, and was roommates with someone who was a painter, who I believe was a little bit older than her and kind of a rebel. He encouraged her to embrace her art. Mm-hmm. What writer doesn't need someone who's being a bulldog for you and encouraging you to find your way? So again, I'm not very far in, but if you're an essay reader, I highly recommend you find your way to this book. And I think she has some other books out. Again, this one came out in 2017. It is blurbed on the cover by Roxane Gay, and she says, Steelstra is a masterful essayist. Cut to the chase, Miss Gay.
Well, Emily, what have you just read?
Oh my gosh, Chris, I've been really reading, like successfully reading, which is nice. And I'm sorry, that's a mean thing to say since you've been struggling. I finished Jason Reynolds' book, 24 Seconds from Now, A Love Story, which is a YA novel. I both read it and listened to it, and it was narrated by Guy Lockard, who does a great job. This is about Neon, who's in high school, and his girlfriend Aria, and they've been dating for a couple of years, and they're just about to be intimate, have sex for the first time. And it's really told from Neon's point of view and how nervous he is. And then the idea of 24 seconds, he takes 24 and goes back in time with different chapters or ahead. So he'll say 24 months ago, 24 minutes from now. So I found that a really cool way to jump around in time. It goes through Neon's life and how he and Aria met, and his grandfather who offered him a lot of advice about how to be a man, and his mother who has one of those sex talks with him at the local diner about masturbating, and he's completely gobsmacked, and the server's like, what the what? You know? So it was really good. If you're looking for a YA novel, particularly to read with your teenagers or to have around for your teenagers, I would recommend this, but I also enjoyed it very much, both reading it and the audiobook. Again, it's called 24 Seconds from Now by Jason Reynolds.
Nice. I've been hearing a lot of good buzz about that one. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Well, I finished the audiobook I had been listening to, A Web of Obsidian by Lydia M. Hawke. This is the first book in a new series by her called The Obsidian Sisterhood. I listened to the audio. It was a advanced listener copy through Libro, so thank you to them for this. And it was narrated by Sen Annis. And I struggled a little bit initially with the narration, but it was fascinating because her voice sounded a little robotic at times and at other times not. So I don't know. Like if I were to go back and listen, I would pay more attention to when she sounded how, depending on what was going on. The protagonist is Monica Barrett, who's a 69-year-old former nun who is running a shelter for women. And this woman who is pretty much a skeleton is dropped at their door in dirty clothing. And they don't even know if she's alive initially. So they bring her in, and then not too long after that, as they're waiting for the ambulance to come, a mafia guy approaches their yard. And so you find out Monica has like a couple black belts and everything, and she's 69. And of course, she's underrated, right? Talk about being invisible or just being pushed aside because you're old.
Or not taken seriously.
Right. Yeah. And now she knows she's old. And, you know, this guy is a young, muscular dude. So it's not going to be exactly a fair fight. So the action starts right away. That made me not listen to the narrator quite as much because I was listening to the action. This novel is considered urban fantasy. I'm not sure what the difference is between fantasy and supernatural. I'm sure it's all a fine line, horror, creatures, things like that. But it was a very believable world that it's set in. It wasn't like extreme world building. Like some fantasy can be really challenging for me to get into because everything seems completely different. And this one, it seems more like a regular urban environment with some interesting things happening. So if you hear the word fantasy and you run the other way, I don't think you need to do that with this book. If you're interested in reading about a 69-year-old kick-ass former nun and some really cool nuns who are even older than her, you might want to check this one out. It just came out in February. The next book in this series is coming out in June of this year, 2025, and it's called A Tangle of Obsidian. So I will definitely check it out. It entertained me, and I might even listen to the audio again. I don't know if it's going to be the same narrator or not. I enjoyed following the adventures of a woman who was older than me, not by too terribly much, but who really cares about other women.
That sounds so good. And I love that the second book is coming out so soon.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I wonder if this one had been out before and the audiobook just came out, or...
I don't know. The writer, she has other series, so she's a seasoned writer. She may have had that first one wrapped up already, or, I don't really know. I haven't looked into the circumstances yet. There's another character in the book called Phoenix. She's one of the younger women who lived at the home who, with a name like Phoenix, I didn't worry about her too much because I figured, rising from the ashes.
Yes.
So I wonder what role she might take in subsequent novels in this series. And then there's also a woman, a detective, who plays a significant role. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed it very much. A Web of Obsidian by Lydia M. Hawke.
Well, I finished Lone Women by Victor LaValle. This is a book that I got thinking that it would satisfy the Western square on our Ghost Story bingo card, and I am correct. So if you are looking for that, if you're joining us in our year of reading ghost stories and working on your bingo card, which is available on that Ghost Story tab that we talked about at the beginning, this book definitely would work for that. This is one of those, I think all of us readers are always looking for that book that keeps you up late at night, that you can't put down, that ruins your work life, et cetera, et cetera. This did that for me. It was so good. And I will say that I did read this copy that I got from the library. I dipped into the audiobook because I wanted to see what it was like. It was read by Janice Abbott Pratt, and she did a fantastic job. So for you audiobook listeners, do not hesitate to listen to it. Chris, one of the first things that made me think about you as I was reading this book is this is about Adelaide Henry. And the opening scene, which I do not want to ruin for people, was so compelling. She is finishing some business at home in the Lucerne Valley in California. She was living there in her early 30s with her parents, farming. That valley was, for the most part, a Black farming community. Adelaide Henry is a Black woman. And she has this very heavy steamer trunk that she's taking with her. And that's mostly what she's bringing on this trip that she's taking to Montana, because she has to leave California. I'm not going to tell you why. She takes a steamer trunk and she takes a handful of books. And she's on a boat making her way up the Pacific Northwest to then take a different transport to get to Montana. And she found a deck chair and pulled a book from her travel bag, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte.
Yay!
She'd read it so often the cover threatened to fall off. This book and a few others she'd packed would be her only companions. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is brought up several times. There's even some passages from it in this book, which just blew my mind.
That's fascinating. Very cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1915, so I was trying to think, which copy would she be reading? Like, did she get to read the whole thing? Did she or didn't she? I wasn't sure. This is one of those books that I really don't want to spoil. I did want to read a part of the acknowledgments. Victor LaValle talks about how when he's traveling on book tour, he likes to go to a local bookstore and gets a book that has something to do with local history or a novel that takes place in that area. And so he went to the university bookstore. He was at the University of Montana in Missoula and picked up a book called Montana Women Homesteaders, A Field of One's Own, edited by Dr. Sarah Carter. And then he says, did I know there had been lone women homesteaders? Women who didn't need a man to co-sign for their tracts of land? Did I know this right wasn't reserved solely for white women? No, no, and no. And that was only the beginning of what I didn't know. Dr. Carter's book served as an entry point to a period of history that surprised me a little more pretty much every day. I reached out to some of the friends I'd made in Montana, asking if they knew about all this stuff. Most of the people I asked were born and raised in the state, and they had absolutely no idea. Mm. So what he does with this novel takes off from that idea. And Adelaide Henry is someone who goes to Montana and gets herself a piece of land. And there's a process by which you have to prove yourself. It's called proving, which is a 3-year period where you have an opportunity to homestead, to build on this piece of property and prove that you can take possession of it and run it, etc. And she looks at this map when she walks into this room that has tracts of land available and chooses like one of the most remote pieces of land, thinking it's a good idea. But along she's dragging this steamer trunk, which is very heavy, and we don't know what's inside. And I am not going to ruin that for you, dear listeners.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like I have to read it. So many different things are like checking my little requirements here of what turns me on in a book.
Yep. And it wasn't long. I mean, what was it? A couple hundred, just under 300 pages. I really enjoyed this book. Lone Women by Victor LaValle. I think the book that he'd written just before that was called The Changeling, which was also a really popular book. And, you know, we haven't talked about the ghost story thing of poltergeist, demon, ghouls. I would put that book in this category.
Okay.
And there is a little bit of just a good old-fashioned ghost, too.
In The Haunting of Hill House, poltergeists are mentioned as what being the laziest of the ghosts or something like that.
We're just going to rattle things and, you know, like scare people that way. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, there was that movie probably when we were teenagers. I don't remember when that one came out, called Poltergeist.
Yes. Oh my God.
I never saw that because it just seemed way too scary to me.
When I was in the hospital, believe it or not, the nurses in the nursing station were talking about that.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, they're talking about the voices coming from the TV.
Oh, God. I don't think that's the conversation I'd want to hear just as I'm being put under.
Well, I was waking up, so it was all
I'm not
good.
sure that's any better. It's like, where did I wake up? Oh my gosh. Wow.
Am I in the TV?
Right.
Well, okay, and also speaking of Anne Bronte, I love The Tenant of Wildfell Hall for sure, as listeners know if you've listened recently. I also ordered a copy of Agnes Grey, Anne Bronte's other novel, and I plan on reading that really soon. And I was super excited because I saw that Melinda, a YouTuber, her channel is A Web of Stories. She's doing a read of Agnes Grey in March. And it's going to be a slow read, so people can jump in anytime. I need to get my reading brain back in a little bit better shape, I think, still. But I would love to jump in and try and read that one this month.
So does she have a video where she announces that?
Yes, and we can link that in the show notes. So she's doing a whole Bronte celebration in March.
That's great.
Check out her channel if you're interested. Now, what did save my reading life a little bit is that I still had 2 picture books at home from when I had checked out a bunch from the library where I work when we got a new load of picture books in. The first is How Birds Sleep. This is by Sarah Pedry and David Obuchowski. They're a husband and wife team, and they love birds. They started wondering, how do birds sleep? And so this book is an exploration of different types of birds and how they sleep, birds from around the world. And I enjoyed it very much. It's their first picture book that they've done together. Sarah is the artist, and they're both included on the text copyright. Oh my gosh, it's just beautiful. I'm going to hold this up for Emily to see.
Oh, such lovely illustrations. This is like a big
Yes.
one of an owl. And then maybe, I don't know if those are like marsh finch or something like that.
They're swallows, they're tree swallows. So, it starts off with this. It's dusk. Unless you're an owl, it's time to get ready for sleep. As the sun goes down, birds all over the world are preparing for a good night's rest. So, how do birds sleep anyway? So, that's how it starts. And then it ends with, again, the swallows, but then the owl going to sleep. So,
That's
in
great.
between, there are some birds from all over the world. I really enjoyed this. Very lovely book.
That's a question I ask. We live in a place where we see lots of birds, and I am
Hmm.
curious about that. So, what a cool
Yeah.
idea.
And this one came out in 2023, so it's pretty recent. And apparently, seagulls sleep out in the ocean on the water,
Wow.
which I did kind of wonder, where do they go?
Yeah,
And I
that's
guess that's what they
fascinating.
do. There's another type of bird who sleeps in flight. So they have the double hemisphere brain like humans have, but they can separate them. They can compartmentalize the brain so that one part of the brain can keep up with lightly flapping its wings to keep in flight, but then the brain gets the sleep that it needs.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
That's totally amazing. That kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, really good book. And then the other picture book, this is another really good one. The Leaf Detective, How Margaret Lowman Uncovered Secrets in the Rainforest. This is by Heather Lang, illustrated by Jana Christy. This is another gorgeously illustrated book. It's so rich and beautiful. Margaret Lowman is a woman who wanted to become a field biologist at a time when women were sometimes not even allowed in classrooms. Canopy Meg is her nickname.
That's great.
So it starts off with a picture of her looking up at the canopy of a tree in a rainforest. When she first started working in the field, biologists didn't go up into the trees. They would sometimes spray the tree with chemicals to make it die. They'd sometimes cut down the trees and study the bugs. So she was the first really to climb up into the tree and start observing what was going on up in the canopy and was blown away by the amount of bugs and birds and other creatures that she saw there. Her initial interest is in leaves. She wondered about leaves and what their deal was. Again, it's called The Leaf Detective. It's a great story about how she became the first to build a bridge walkway in the canopy of a rainforest so that people, regular folks, can come and walk and see and start to learn the importance of rainforests, that they're just not damp, dark places where poisonous snakes hang out, but
Right.
how important they are to our ecosystem.
How cool.
Yeah, a great book. I highly recommend this one. It's perfect for Women's History Month. And I should also note it's blurbed by Jane Goodall. Young readers everywhere will be fascinated and inspired to learn more about nature. That is true. And that's The Leaf Detective, How Margaret Lowman Uncovered Secrets in the Rainforest by Heather Lang and Jana Christy. And this one came out in 2021. So again, another fairly recent book. Highly, highly recommend it.
I love that those books helped you get back into reading.
I
I
know.
mean, it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
They got
Whatever
me
it
back into
takes.
reading because they do say like you need to work your brain,
Hmm.
when you're coming out of it instead of just sleeping all the time or what have you. And I also learned a lot, which is friggin' awesome.
And it's a way to learn and it not be so complicated.
Hmm.
I love that. That's what I love about early reading books and kids nonfiction in general. I appreciate that about it. Well, I read two cookbooks. The Fishwife cookbook, Delightful Tinned Fish Recipes for Every Occasion. And this was by Becca Millstein, who was the founder of this company called Fishwife. And then the recipes were by Vilda Gonzalez. And you may be seeing these tins of canned fish on your grocery store shelves. Tinned fish is kind of having a moment. I love it because it's already cooked. It's in a small portion size and you can take it wherever you need to go. And I am endlessly trying to eat more protein and I struggle with that a lot. So I've kind of fallen in love with the FISHWIFE Tin Fish and then was thrilled to see that they have a new cookbook. I really enjoyed it. I got it as an advanced reader copy and read it cover to cover. And what I like about it is they respect the fact that people who buy tin fish are probably interested in recipes that aren't too complicated. The point is, I don't want to spend a lot of time. I want to open this can and have delicious, well-seasoned fish and then add it to something. So I appreciated that. There were some really super easy recipes and then some pasta recipes that took a little bit more time. And then the other book I read is thanks to Karen at Barker for Books, who posted that she went to this book event with a very tall, handsome chap who was holding a cookbook, and there Karen was by him in the picture, smiling widely. I think she was there for his third cookbook, which just came out. I went to the library right away and could only find what I believe is his first cookbook called The Hebridean Baker at Home, Flavors and Folklore from the Scottish Islands. And this is by Coinneach Macleod, and he was raised in the Outer Hebrides off the coast of Scotland. And his recipes are very much about the Hebrides, and the photography is beautiful, particularly for those of us who love water. It includes pictures of his husband and his Scottish Terrier where they live. The recipes here also were accessible, and he had good substitutions for ingredients that you might only be able to find in Scotland. Like, for example, treacle is molasses where we live in the United States. So I just did an ingredient one post sharing images of these. If you want to see it, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, that's a great post. Thank you for sharing that. And one of the things you included too was a follow-up on the beautiful sardines in that one pan. Oh my gosh, made my mouth water.
Yeah, it occurred to me I didn't open any of the fish. And then after I finished the video and did the post, I was like, oh, I'm going to eat some of these. And then I thought, well, I should probably show you what these look like. Super delicious. I think you've been a tinned fish eater for years, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. I always just thought of it as tuna, which I find, even though that's what I had for lunch today, I find that kind of boring. You have to jazz it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But these tinned fishes now are coming seasoned, like those sardines were in a delicious preserved lemon olive oil. And
yeah, it's nice to see more types of tinned fish coming to American shelves because it used to only be at import stores or my, relatives in Germany would send stuff.
Right.
So it's nice to see the growth of that.
I'm always on the lookout for eel for you because I know you love eel, and I've seen octopus and I've seen some other things, but I haven't seen tinned eel. Maybe it's coming.
Oh, yeah, we'll see. Smoked tinned eel, that would be a dream.
Yes. So I read one other book. Did you do any other reading?
No, the only other thing I have is our short story.
Okay, I'll just talk about this one briefly because I didn't like this book.
Oh, wow.
And I don't love talking about books that I didn't like. But
well, you finished it, though.
I did.
Interesting.
Thank you. That's a good word for it. I was mad at myself the whole time I was reading it. Well, let me tell you the name. So it's Swept Away by Beth O'Leary. And this is coming out on April 10th. So just around the corner. I loved her book, The Flat Share, which has also been made into a television series. So people might be familiar with that. The Flat Share came out in 2019. I think the TV series came out in 2022. The conceit of this novel is two young people, one's in her early 30s, one's in his early 20s, meet at a bar and have a one-night stand. And they have this one-night stand on a houseboat. They're in England. And they wake up in the morning and the houseboat has been swept out to sea. And now they're stuck. The reason the houseboat got swept out to sea is because they were so drunk when they got back to the houseboat. The neighbor houseboater said, hey, you need to tie up your boat. It's loose or whatever. And instead of tying it to the cleat on the dock, they tied it to itself and then ended up out to sea. So I think part of what I didn't like about it is I felt like that was slightly unbelievable. Like usually when you see houseboats, they're in docks really close together. It seems like it'd be pretty hard to get way swept out to sea where you'd be lost at sea for 11 days.
Well, and why would it even not be moored when they come back? It's not like they were out drinking and cruising on their houseboat
Right.
and then
Yeah.
pulled into the dock. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
So I had a little bit of a hard time with that. But then we had our reading salon. With our Patreon listeners, we have a monthly reading salon the fourth Sunday of the month. What we were talking about the last time was books that we think go under the radar or should, that we just wanted our fellow readers to know about.
We were talking about books that we thought need more loving, that maybe didn't get enough attention when they first came out, or that need a little bit of a revival.
Right. And Deb mentioned the author Linda Holmes, who wrote Evie Drake Starts Over. And she has some other books. I think she has one that's just coming out, actually. And what Deb said she liked about them was partly that the characters are older. And so the love story part or the challenges that they might have in their life were more meaningful to her as a reader. And this light bulb went off because I went back then after our reading salon to pick up Swept Away, which I wasn't enjoying, and was like, oh, it's because some of the stuff they're talking about is these young love angst and problems that I don't care. I just don't care. Right. But did I put it down, Deb? No, I didn't put it down. And then my son, Jacob, and daughter-in-law, Nicole, were in the process of having a baby. And so it was those couple days where they live far away and I knew she was in labor. And I was like, oh, it'd be so nice to read a light, easy book. And I think that made me more angry because it wasn't doing that for me. So all to say my own problem that I didn't stop reading it. People might like it. I didn't. I'm sorry. I also think that Beth O'Leary has put out a book a year. And part of me wonders, like, if maybe.
She needs a rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was almost 400 pages.
Wow.
So it was also really long.
Yeah.
So Swept Away, Beth O'Leary, pubs on April 10th.
Wow. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, Emily is a grandmother again. You heard correctly.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Baby Beau Augustine was born on February 20th. Thank you very much. He's healthy and we're all glad about that.
Very cool. So the last thing that we have to talk about in our just read category is our short story from the Penguin Book of Ghost Stories. This time around, we read What Was It by Fitz-James O'Brien. This is a story that was first published in 1859 in Harper's New Monthly Magazine. Mr. O'Brien was born in Ireland, spent his inheritance in London, and then made his way to New York to try and make it. And he did a lot of different types of writing jobs. And one of the things he was known for was writing these stories that were kind of uncanny, ghostly, horror-ish, supernatural. I think this is my first story by him that I've read. How about you?
Definitely. Yeah, I've never read him before. And my first question was, is it O'Brien or O'Brien? Because it's spelled Brien. And I read it and listened to the audiobook, and the narrator did say O'Brien, which surprised me. So yeah. I just wanted to say that since he's Irish, I thought, because the author Edna O'Brien is spelled Brien.
See, now, and I've heard people say Edna O'Brien. So,
oh, really?
But yeah.
So maybe it just has to do with accent or something.
That's something. Well, you know what? In our next Patreon salon coming up March 23rd, our topic is going to be Irish lit and writers. So that might be something for one of us or a listener to look into.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, I struggled with this story a little bit, and I read half of it, and then I got the audiobook, and I loved it on audio. It was narrated by David Monteith, and it just made the story come alive to me. The first thing I thought we could talk about is, I don't think we want to spoil the story, but it's these two guys are smoking opium and talking. And one of the first things they talk about is, do you believe in ghosts and haunted houses? Because they are renting what the landlord tells them when they go to rent it is a haunted house.
What I really liked about it, their landlady, Mrs. Moffat, decides to rent a different house than the one that they're all living in. And that happens to be haunted, which was a house, really wonderful, almost mansion, I guess, that was built by a very well-known man who was wealthy, a Mr. A, who I could only think of Mr. Astor for New York in this time period, right? Who dies in Europe. And then shortly after he dies in Europe, the house becomes haunted. And so even though it's in a fancy part of town, people have purchased it or lived in it and fled pretty quickly. So when Mrs. Moffat decides to tell all of her renters, hey, I'm thinking about moving there, they all say yes, and they move with her, which I thought, that is not what happens today.
Right.
A landlord doesn't sell a property and go buy a new one and say, hey, everybody, do you want to come and move? At least not that I've ever heard of, not that I'm in real estate.
It's very generous, but also it does the work for her, right? She doesn't have to find new tenants. She liked her tenants.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Harry is the main protagonist, and he's smoking opium with his friend, Dr. Hammond, which is something that men of a certain class and inclination did back then.
Which he says, as he's the narrator, like, I hope that you don't. He cautions the reader,
right,
please don't smoke opium. But, it just made me think it's something, and we don't have to go on a tangent now, although I'm happy to do that. Do you believe in ghosts and haunted houses? Here we are, we're like in our third month of reading ghost stories for the year. And the gentleman caller and I had a great conversation about it at dinner last night, because I said to him, it occurs to me, Chris and I haven't talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so accepting with Haunting of Hill House and with this short story, like, here, come to my haunted house. And they're like, okay, I'll come, Do you believe in haunted houses, Chris?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do too.
And we can talk a lot more about that, I think, as the year goes on.
Yes.
Or maybe not. In The Haunting of Hill House, they talk about different theories of why houses become haunted. One of the things was leftover emotions or emotions that get seeped into the house. And there's actually a scene in Swan's Way by Proust where he's a little boy dreading always having to walk up the stairs alone to go to bed, because he gets sent to bed and he's an only child when all the adults are still having this dinner party. And he says, walking up the stairs, my sorrow was absorbed by the varnish of the stairwell. And I just thought, oh my God, that is such a haunting scene, and how hauntings happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that Jim and I talked about too, is a lot of kids see things in their houses. And is it because they have vivid imaginations, or is it because they are more open to seeing things than maybe we are as adults? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
In this story, what Dr. Hammond asks Harry is, what do you consider to be the greatest element of terror? And then they move into this haunted house, and you can imagine that something happens.
Right. And something does happen.
Yeah, it does. And what happens is so odd and somewhat believable. The ending was a letdown for me on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it was intentional, because I think everything was supposed to go back to normal and to be material and concrete. Maybe. That is what I was thinking about. Because I thought it was a good story, and it did carry me along.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was sad, a little bit sad as well. But then I also thought, and I brought this up during the conversation for The Haunting of Hill House, was all of it just in Eleanor's mind, who's the main character in The Haunting of Hill House, and everyone said no, that it really happened. And I thought the same thing with this one. Like, okay, the story starts out with them smoking opium.
Yeah. Well, right. So this is the thing. It carried me along. It was entertaining. But when I look back at it, I thought that whole setup with the opium and taking them into what's now known as Orientalism, the Orient as being this exotic place with strange things and strange happenings, which I thought would be related to the haunting. But then the place is haunted because Mr. A dies, and we don't know who's haunting it or why. Like, there's no connection between his death and the haunting, really, other than it happened shortly after he died.
Right.
And they're smoking opium in the old apartment, aren't they? And so now moving into this new place, I was just like, there doesn't seem to be a connection between the opium, the East, and what happens other than the type of ghost thing they encounter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't see connections there all the time. Or maybe I'm still just a little brain wonky.
I would have to read it again, which goes to what we say about short stories. That's so fascinating. They're so short. You'd think you'd be able to get it all in one read. And maybe I will listen to it again. I thought that they had smoked the opium and then went to bed.
Oh, so maybe they're in the new place already.
Yeah,
okay.
I think they are. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right too. Because he goes to bed then and he leaves the light on, his gas lamp on just a little bit. So there's that little blue so he could locate it quickly.
Right. And I have to say, having just finished Lone Women that has like a demon haunting sort of thing, it was very interesting then to read this short story and think like, oh, wow. Yeah. Another creepy creature situation.
Right. And another thing that struck me too is just in The Haunting of Hill House and in this story, there are so many other books and stories mentioned that deal with hauntings and stuff or stories. I mean, let's keep on with the Brontes, right? One of the notes actually said that Charlotte Bronte in her 1850 edition calls Heathcliff a ghoul and Afrit, I think is how you pronounce that. I was just like, oh my God, the Brontes are popping up everywhere. But there are other works that are mentioned a lot, including the Arabian Nights and others. And as we saw in The Haunting of Hill House, there are so many other literary works referred to. So I'm just curious now about how that's going to play out for the rest of this year. And if that's kind of an element of these ghost stories that they do kind of build on one another or like to make that web between stories.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you should bring that up too, because I will say one of the things that's not working for me with this collection, because of, I think, how highly distractible I am, is that there are so many notes on every story that I'm so tempted to just keep flipping back and reading the notes. And then I lose my way in the story. So I think it's one of the things I really enjoyed about the audiobook is I just listened to it and didn't allow myself to do that. And then went and looked at the notes afterwards, which I felt was super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what all my, well, at least the professors that I really respected used to say is like, read through the story and then go look at the notes, you know, because like you want to get the full impact of the story as much as you can without the distractions.
Yeah.
Unless you can't help yourself, you know, but.
Or if you feel like, oh, I don't know what this word means or what is he trying to say here? So I'm going to go look at the notes. But then the notes are so long. And then when I go back to the story, I'm like, oh, I've lost my way in the story, you know?
Right.
I would definitely recommend the audiobook. I know one of our listeners, I think Julie, got the audiobook. I have it. I bought it. So now I feel like I can do both the whole year, which I'm excited about.
So is it different narrators for each story?
I think it only has two narrators.
Okay.
So maybe I'm thinking if it's a female author, they're going to use the female narrator, but I don't know. This one was the male narrator.
Very cool. It was a very interesting story, I got to say. It kept me turning the pages to see what happened. Although I have to be honest and say it took me 3 times to really have it take off, but I attribute that more to myself than the story.
I had the same situation. Okay. I started it one night and fell asleep, full disclosure. And then I started it the next day. And then I was like, I'm going to listen to the audiobook. Yeah. So I did 3 times as well. So again, that was called What Was It?
By Fitz-James O'Brien.
And reminder that we have a thread on Goodreads for the Ghost Story short story project, Buddy Read, that we're doing all year.
Yeah, our next one coming up will be by Edward Bulwer Lytton, The Haunted and the Haunters, or The House and the Brain.
Oh my. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. All right.
Chris, did you have any Biblio adventures?
You know what? I did. In addition to the wonderful conversation we had about Swan's Way, I attended a horror buzz panel. You know, Buzz Books regularly puts out usually snippets of books that are hot coming out in future months. They also have a YouTube channel where they are putting up these panels that you can sign up for. You have to register to watch it live if you'd like to, but it's also on their YouTube channel. So we will have a link in the show notes. But this one on the Horror Buzz panel featured 4 writers, each speaking with their editor about their forthcoming book, which is a format we've seen before. So just quickly, Ivy Pachoda was talking with her editor, Daphne Durham, about her first horror novel, which is coming out June 17th from Putnam, called Ecstasy. And this one is set in modern Greece. And it focuses on a woman whose husband has recently died, and he was very controlling. She was very controlled in this upper echelon society that they moved about in. And now she's being controlled by her son, who has this, I think it's a building opening in Greece. So she's being trapped there. And on the beach near this building is a tent city where women are living. And she hears them beating their drums every night. And she's feeling called to go to them. So that sounds like a really good setup to me. And Ivy Pachoda has written a lot of thrillery type books. So this is, I don't know if this is her 4th novel. I'm not sure. Next up was Marcus Redmond talking with his editor, Letitia Gomez, about his debut vampire novel, which is coming out July 29th from Defina, called Blood Slaves. I've already acquired a copy of this, an advanced reader copy, because I had to get on this one. It's a reimagining of the vampire origin story combined with alternative American history. It sounds like such a powerful novel to me, written out of anger and frustration. Marcus is a Black man, and he's always liked vampires. And the cool thing about how BuzzBooks puts up these videos is each author and editor is their own clip, so you could focus on which one you want to head to. He had a bit of a smash up between 2 ideas that this novel is the result of. So I look forward to getting into that. I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of time before I jump into it. There's also Heather Steele talking with her editor, Alexandra Murphy, about her novel coming out August 5th from Page Street Horror, The Faceless Things We Adore. Another interesting one. A woman leaves her shitty boyfriend, travels out of the country, joins a commune. Everything's hunky-dory until cracks start developing. And then Daphne Famond and her editor, Candace Coote, talk about her book coming out August 12th from Penguin called The House of Monstrous Women. And this is set in 1986 in the Philippines. A woman goes to visit her friend who's rumored to be a witch, and the home that she lives in is maze-like. So 4 really good sounding horror novels coming out this summer.
Wow, that one sounds like it might have a little Shirley Jackson inspiration, a maze-like house.
Right.
Those sound great.
Yeah,
wow.
Don't they? So yeah. I really appreciate these panels because it gives you such a different sense of a book too when you listen to an author speaking with their editor about the book and how it came to be and developed and what their intentions were.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
I had a very quick couch biblio adventure. The gentleman caller and I watched Call of the Wild, starring Harrison Ford. We watched it the old-fashioned way with a DVD from the library. This came out in 2020. It was really good. It's based on the novel by Jack London, The Call of the Wild, which was published in 1903. Jim has read the book. I have not read the book. In the middle of watching the movie, I was texting Chris, have you read The Call of the Wild? And she's like, no, too much animal.
Yeah, that's one
danger.
that I have never been tempted to read. Because
Yeah.
of the animal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good story. I learned some history about the gold rush in Alaska and the use of dogs. There was some CGI with the dogs, which was okay. I don't love that, but I understand, of course, why they did it. Harrison Ford was great. I mean, I think he's having a great acting career in the later part of his life, playing these characters. And I enjoyed it. I would recommend it if anyone has either read the novel or hasn't. And it's also beautiful scenery in Alaska. I really enjoyed that part. I felt like I got to go on a little mini vacation while I watched it. And then I had a great Biblio adventure over the weekend. I got in the car with a gentleman caller and drove to Washington Depot, Connecticut, which is a beautiful backcountry twisty-turny drive with lots of stone walls. I texted Chris at one point, it goes down in infamy that one of our first episodes where Chris talked about a book about the stone walls of New England. Or was it of Connecticut or New England?
New England. That book is Stone by Stone, The Magnificent History in New England's Stone Walls by Robert M. Thorson.
We joke because she talked about the book for a long time on one of our first episodes, but it's probably the book I think about the most because there are so many stone walls.
Yes.
Beautiful stone walls.
I mean, I did cut half of that when I was editing, but when I realized Emily was starting to look like she was starving to death, I decided I should probably stop talking.
Anyway, it was a beautiful drive and we did pass lots of stone walls. And I'm sorry that Chris wasn't able to join us, but I was going to the Hickory Stick Bookshop, which Chris had talked about on an earlier episode because she has been there, to see Alyssa Altman in conversation with Carrie Arsenal about Alyssa's new book, which just pubbed this week, Permission, the New Memoirist and the Courage to Create. She has written 3 memoirs. This is a new book that is part memoir and also part book about craft and giving people permission to tell their stories when people are telling you you shouldn't, or you may be filled with fear and shame and afraid about how to tell your story. I have already talked about on previous episodes that when Alyssa published her first memoir, there were 8 sentences in there mentioning something that she did not think of as a family secret because it was something her father talked to her about daily. But one side of her family did consider it a family secret and disavowed her.
Yeah.
It is now 10 years since that book came out, and she has a much different perspective on that experience. And she talks about that in this book and has also been teaching memoir and talks about what advice she gives to her students, which she offers in this book as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm halfway through it. It's a great book. It was a really fun conversation. One of the things that she said that I thought was really interesting was ideally, you should never be where you thought you would be at the end of the book. Throw out the outline. That she really feels like part of the process of writing the book for her is that she learns and changes as a person from start to finish. And I can see that, especially in the world of memoir.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that, especially in the world of memoir. It might be different in fiction in some ways. I mean, I've heard fiction writers say they have an ending that they write toward, or they don't have anything. They're just pantsters, as they say. But with memoir, like, how could it not change you when you have things coming up as you're writing about something and making these connections you've never seen before in your life?
Right. And growing and changing as a person. I mean, one of the questions I asked her is if she felt like she needed to be a certain distance to handle her rage or her anger or whatever those feelings were that she might have had. She said, yeah, I mean, that it's not as if you don't do some writing or thinking during that time period, but then to be able to look back at it with some distance is a helpful pursuit.
Yeah.
She also talked about the genesis of this book was that she was invited to write an essay for Krista Tippett's On Being blog. And so I'll try to find that and put a link in the show notes. If you want to get an idea of the voice of this book, I think it would be nice to read that. So it was a great event. I'm really glad that I went, and I'm really sorry that you couldn't join us.
Yeah, me too. It happens.
It does. So upcoming jaunts, you got anything on the books?
I do. I have a couple things. I may have mentioned this last episode already, but on March 19th, Megan Marshall is going to be in conversation with Janice Nomura about her new memoir, Afterlives. We had Megan on as a guest a couple episodes ago. And this is part of the American Inspiration series, a best-selling author series by American ancestors. You do have to register for that. We'll put a link in the show notes. And then on April 3rd, the Mount Book Club, just want to remind people, April 3rd, they're having a discussion of A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton, and then pairing that with Willa Cather's One of Ours, 2 World War I novels written by these giants of American literature. So I'm really looking forward to that. How about
And I
you?
believe you have to register for that as well.
You do have to register for that. And I know space is limited for these book club discussions. It's free, but you do have to register.
So we'll put that registration link in the show notes. We also have an upcoming joint, John, on April 9th. We're going to be going to an event via the Mark Twain House, which is in Hartford, with Amity Gage in conversation with Amy Bloom about Amity's new book, Heartwood, which I talked about a couple episodes ago. That's about the woman that's hiking the Appalachian Trail and goes missing. It is an in-person event. You can get, I think it's like a $10 ticket to just go to the event, or they have a ticket at a level to get the book as well. Looking forward to that combo.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's going to be nice to get out and about again, too, together.
Yes, indeed. And then I'm also leaving this week for Carbondale, Colorado to go get my hands on Baby Bo on Grammy duty. There are some fun bookstores in Carbondale, and I love both the Carbondale Public Library and Basalt Public Library. So might get some time to visit those if they let me out of the house. How about upcoming reads?
Oh, I have a new book in the house that I couldn't resist. I think it's really great for Women's History Month or any month. It's called Bright Circle, 5 Remarkable Women in the Age of Transcendentalism. It's by Randall Fuller. And this book, I came across it. I'm a member of the Margaret Fuller Society, so I saw people talking about it there first. And then Hannah of Hannah's Books, a YouTuber, gave it a really good review. Oh, you know what? She also writes reviews, and we could put a link to the review that she wrote in the show notes. But this is a joint biography of Mary Moody Emerson, Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, Sophia Peabody, Lydia Jackson Emerson, and Margaret Fuller.
Oh, wow.
And how they influenced and probably created American transcendentalism. Because Emerson's aunt was highly influential in his intellectual development. And some of his essays were even very much based on what she taught him. It's really great to see this information being dug into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness, Chris, I have a whole stack here. And I just said to Jim, how many of these books can I bring on my trip? And he was like, not that many. One of them is called Saving Vincent, a novel of Jo Van Gogh. And this is written by Joan Fernandez. This is coming out in April. I believe Jo Van Gogh was Vincent van Gogh's brother's wife. And she is largely responsible for Vincent van Gogh's paintings being brought out to the public. So this is a historical fiction novel, and it's being published by She Writes Press, which is a great press that publishes women authors. And I'm showing Chris the cover. We'll put this on social media. It's a beautiful cover with a Vincent van Gogh type of a painting. And then when they sent the advanced reader copy, it came with these M&Ms that say Saving Vincent and are the same colors, like Vincent van Gogh colors.
Matching color palette to the book cover. Very nice.
Yes. Very fun. And then I also, for fun, I'm going to take the second installment in the Pentecost and Parker mystery series, Murder Under the Skin. I talked about Fortune Favors the Dead, the first book in the series, and how much I liked it. I think this will be a fun flight read. So that's definitely going in my carry-on. And then the other one I'm taking is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, which I've just been waiting to read this and I don't know why I haven't. So I got a copy. So that will be going with me as well.
Nice. Very cool. Sounds like a great collection.
Yes.
And if you run out of reading materials, I know you can always raid your son and daughter-in-law's bookshelves.
For sure. And part of why I'm bringing Saving Vincent is because Nicole is a big fan of artists. So I thought she might enjoy getting her hands on that copy if she can read. I know when Rachel had Nina, she wasn't doing much reading because she had tired brain.
Yeah.
So don't forget to, I'm bringing my e-reader, which has about 200 books on it. So
yes.
I will not go without.
Never.
Reminder that our second quarter read along is The Good House by Nana Raidu. We will put a link in the show notes to the book on our bookshop.org page so you can read more about it and get yourself a copy. And we'd love you to join us.
Absolutely. Until then, everyone, we wish you lots of
Happy reading.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.